David Finkel is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist at The Washington Post. His new book, American Dreamer: Life in a Divided Country, tells the story of a fractured America through the eyes of a veteran of the Iraq War. Finkel's work of immersive journalism captures this moment in America as Brent Cummings navigates the country's deep divisions.
14 months in Iraq, 28 years in the Army, all in the name of defending democracy.
Through the experiences of Brent Cummings, an American dreamer holds a mirror to our own lives in an increasingly divided nation. David Finkel, good to have you here today to talk about An American Dreamer: Life in a Divided Country.
Thank you.
Your book follows a retiring military person, Brent Cummings.
Right.
And he's in sort of a unique position at the time of the book in that he's retiring from the military. He's back home and he's at a moment of change for him. How did you know he would be a good subject for you to follow along with and consider for your next book?
Well, I've known Brent a long time. I met him in 2007 in Iraq when he was part of a combat unit in the period of the war called the Surge. And I was writing a book about a unit that went into the Surge. I just wanted to write a book to see what would happen to these guys. And that was Brent's unit. So I was with them probably about 8 months, a little more on the ground with them. I happened to have a room next door to Brent's. So we got to know each other quite well. And during that 8 months, I saw him close up, not only wrestling with the tactics of war or the strategy of war, but in many ways the morality of war. And he was a good soldier. He was a good human being. That's what I saw. And if you fast forward a decade, we're in 2016 now, and the country seemed to be moving even away from a politically fraught moment into something deeper, into a moral reckoning. And I wanted to write a book about this period in American history, and I needed a character to write about. And who better than Brent Cummings, who said to me one day that he felt like he had survived one war only to find himself easing into another one. I found that to be a compelling sentiment. And I wanted to write about the period in time by using his experiences, to see what he went through over a course of time as a way to write about what many of us have been going through.
And he's a good person to see the world through his eyes, because he's been away, he's back. He's really a patriot. You can feel his grief about what he sees in the American landscape today, and kind of go along with him with that.
There were other things that I liked about being able to write about him. I knew going into it, I didn't want to write, for instance, about the experience of a politician who in many ways is the cause of the moment of reckoning we're in. And I didn't want to write about somebody on the extreme, for instance, somebody who might at some point end up climbing up the walls of the Capitol as part of an insurrection. I wanted to find somebody more in the middle, again, more reflective of us, more in his story. You might be able to recognize your own story, your own experiences of what you've been going through. So Brent, he's a guy, he grew up in Mississippi. He Army for 28 years. He hunts, he drives a truck. So you might make certain assumptions about him, but the assumptions don't work. He would describe himself, I think, as a little more Republican than Democrat, a little more conservative than liberal. But what happened to him is he was brought up, and his career in the Army was to believe in this ethos of you don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal. You try to be a good person. And what happened is when Donald Trump came on the scene, he became so offended, not by Trump policies, but by the vulgarisms of this man, the lying, the cheating, perhaps the illegalities. And so that led to a lot of what Brent started going through over this 4-year period, which was really the journey of someone who was a little baffled to somebody who by the end was a little outraged and sorely hurt by what was happening in the country he loves. There's a line in the book, it's something like, 14 months in Iraq, 28 years in the Army, all in the name of defending democracy. And once he got out of the Army, now he was no longer defending it. He was in it just in time to feel it unravel. And that unraveling, like so many of us, is what he experienced in the book.
This is a work of what I would call creative nonfiction, in that it's journalistic, it's true through
Yes.
your immersive journalism that you did when you were researching this, but it's written in the way that it's like a novel. And
Yeah,
so we
yeah.
really do get to know this character quite in depth. He's fully formed.
Well, I
this
appreciate
Brent
hearing
is.
that. After The Good Soldiers came out, there was a review in the New York Times, and the guy wrote at one point, you can take this book off the shelf 20 years from now and read it and think, this is what happened. This is how it felt. And I hope the same thing is true of this book on both ends. It's very much what happened, and it is an accurate reflection of how it felt.
Mm-hmm. Michael Owens is his neighbor.
Yeah.
Is Michael's a real person?
Yeah,
Correct.
everybody in the book is
Okay, no composites there.
No, I can't do that. It was
Can't do that.
all on the
Oh,
record. Everybody knew I was a reporter going
Right.
into it. It's the usual rules of journalism
Yeah.
guided me here. Yeah.
Yes. And Michael's an interesting character as well. He's a neighbor of Brent's, quadriplegic, not through the war, through an accident.
Yes.
And he and Brent have a discussion one day that kind of, well, tell us about that talk.
Well,
that they have.
they're next door neighbors, and they get along quite well. They're good neighbors to each other. Michael is very much a Trump guy. He is MAGA through and through, more than anyone, or as much anyone, anyway, as anyone I've encountered on all my years of reporting. I like spending time with Michael. I learned a lot from him about the way he grew up, the way he learned to think, what brought him to become a person who is so totally supportive of Donald Trump. So here are these two neighbors, and they didn't really talk. They knew this of each other, but they didn't really talk about it. They avoided it. They helped each other out, as neighbors do. But one day, they did get into it. And it was right after Brent retired from the Army, and he was still getting used to the idea that he's allowed to talk out loud now about his feelings about a president who's really no longer his commander-in-chief. Mm. And it probably went on for half an hour. Laura, Brent's wife, remembers going away and thinking, just stop talking, stop talking. Michael remembers saying to Brent, let's make it clear, I am a conservative, I am a Trump man through and through. And Brent's memories have to do with saying, he lies. And Michael saying, well, what are you talking about? And Brent trying to set out some of the lies from Donald Trump, and Michael saying again and again, I don't know about this, I'm not familiar with it, because Michael, like so many people, gets his information from a certain subgroup of places that give presentations. But they got into it, and it was getting pretty heated. And at one point, they both sort of realized, we got to stop this, and they peeled back. And it's the only time they've had a discussion about this raw separation between them. Mm-hmm. We're all finding versions of this in our own lives, yes. Whether in discussions with, online discussions with friends, with family members, and what do you do? And I think it's something we're all trying to figure out how to navigate, and that's why, and that's one of the reasons I find Brent to be such a good person to write about and a good example of these times, because he backed away and they found a way to keep getting along. Mm-hmm. Now that leaves a question in my mind. Is that how we get along through such a fractured period, by almost a version of willful ignorance? We're gonna pretend this thing doesn't exist? Mm-hmm. Or do you get along by thinking, let's find corners where we can talk to each other, and instead of engaging in these discussions where we're trying to chest out, persuade each other of something, we're just going to find areas we can talk about, and maybe out of that, friendships can continue and deepen, and it leads to acts of understanding. I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
But I like what they did that day.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel as if many of us, if not most of us, have had a similar sort of experience. I think what you're hoping for is what I hope for too, was when people even discuss on that level and then stop and back off, they still see each other as human. You know, we have to see each other one-on-one. We can't continue to just group people into some, amorphous group and expect any, healing or resolution.
Right.
And they did see each other as individuals. They were cordial. They, maybe talked some, but they didn't talk politics, as far as I know, at least in your book.
Well, but you also get the sense that it's there. It's
It's there.
simmering.
Yeah.
And so, is the right way to get along through such a bad period to just let it simmer and sort of ignore it, or do you confront it? I haven't seen a confrontation go well. I have not seen it go well, and I have seen their examples go pretty well.
Yeah.
But one of the things about the book, I appreciate the way you described it. And I thank you for that. It's important to note it's not a political book. It's not an anti-Trump book. It's not a pro-Trump book. The characters have their feelings, but it's the feelings of the characters. It's not me. It's not a political book in any sense, except how the characters engage with the various subjects at hand.
Absolutely.
But man, politics is there because it's everywhere at the moment. It's I don't know when this will air, but it's an interesting day. It's the day after Super Tuesday.
Right.
It's pretty much a done deal. We have our two candidates, and even if we presume to know who they were, now it's locked in, and we've got 8 months to go of what people, if there's any agreement, it's going to be chaotic. And here's Brent. It's like Groundhog Day in a way. Here it comes again. And to have watched that man's journey from 2016 through who he was after January 6th and January 20th and into the early months of 2021, I just think there's so much relevance now in what he went through. And continues to go through.
Definitely. I mean, you could almost follow him through this election and see what happens.
Yeah.
Your title, An American Dreamer, is interesting because it works on a couple of levels. Brent has some nightmares, and you talk about those, but he has some bad dreams, and he realizes that some of those are because of the country he's living in and the experiences he's having. But I also hear in that title, An American Dreamer, somebody who dreams of a better country. Was that intentional for you?
Well, I hope it's a title that works on many levels, and if anyone listening decides to read the book, when you get to the last line is sort of when it clicks into place and why I think it works as a title. One of the parts is, like many of us, he does have these core American values and hopes for a country that is better. When he leaves this world, he will have left a better country than the one he started out in. And
that's his hope.
That's something I think we all hope for.
Sure.
Since he came home from Iraq, he began having a pretty tough dream that he didn't really talk to people about. And there were 800 guys in the unit I wrote about, and they all came home with dreams. So he's not alone in this. His particular dream was he was a guy raised to believe in service, which is part of the reason he joined the Army and stayed in the Army, and also just this kind of version of American goodness that's grounded in the idea that in this country, if you act more better than bad, you have a chance of a meaningful life, a life that will have some value and meaning. And he grew up to believe in this for a number of reasons outlined in the book. Comes home from Iraq, he begins having this dream every so often in which it's almost like this dimensional blackness he's existing in, and he can't really see anything. He just knows that this blackness it's above him and below him and goes deep, and it has almost a magnetic pull pulling him into it, and the only thing he can really hear is the sound of who knows how many people just quietly laughing.
Yeah.
And it's a dream that wakes him up and causes him very often to scream, because his understanding is people are laughing at him for being naive enough to believe that life has value. And so one of the things going on in the book is as he's navigating this period, he's also trying to sustain his belief in not only in the country, but in his own version of life, that it does have value and it does have meaning.
He almost gets, I would almost say, blindsided at one point when he gets a job with an organization that is going to help train police on community policing. And it's connected to the work he had done in Israel. And all of a sudden, there's a protest against this organization by the faculty of Georgia State, I believe, and as well as other people in the community. And I feel like that was something that must have really shocked him and amazed him, because I think he's not a racist in any way, and he would not.
No, he's not.
He would in no way would he be trying to, in some way do something that would harm the black community anywhere.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's one of many conflicts that come up in the book. As I'm tracking him, more and more, just the most banal things would become a source of conflict. There's a little scene, for instance, when his wife Laura is in a grocery store, and they're giving out cheese samples, and there's a woman working there, and there are two customers. There's Laura, and there's another customer who appears to be of Asian descent. And Laura tries the cheese and likes it and says to the woman, "What kind of cheese is it?" And the woman who works there says, "It's white American." And then she says, "Just like you and me." And Laura's thinking, what? What just happened here? What just happened here? Brent and Laura go to Costco one day. This is during the pandemic, and there's a woman with a mask dangling, and a worker says, "Policies, you have to raise the mask," and the woman is just so offended and begins shouting, "Why do I have to do this?" And finally pulls up the mask and takes a bottle of water and dumps it all over herself and just saying, "Is this what you want? Is this what you want?" And there was a thing with Michael, two neighbors just talking on a driveway. Where Brent works, suddenly there's a protest against where he's working, and it's clear to him he's being called a racist, and his history, it's the opposite. There's no racism in him whatsoever. But because he's part of something, he's assumed to be a certain way, and the assumptions win the day rather than, and this gets back to what we were talking earlier, there was no attempt at a conversation. There was just an assumption, he must be this, I'm going to call him this. It becomes more and more inflamed, and once again, Brent finds himself thinking, what is happening in my country? Where's the understanding?
What do you hope people take away from the book in terms of that sort of thing?
I've been wrestling with the question. There's no prescription in the book. It's not, this is a book about how we need to behave. That's for, I guess, all of us to figure out on our own, who we want to be and how we want to be. Through my career, I have chosen characters to write about who I like to think are in the middle, who have some resonance, who I care about, and through their actions, whatever happens to them in the course of the narrative, it's not like there's a clear answer, this is how we need to be, other than an attempt, I guess, at understanding. Now, maybe that's pretty thin for what somebody should try to get out of a book, but maybe not in this day and age. Something that reminds us of the urgency of trying to be understanding rather than full of assumptions and vitriol. Maybe that's not the worst thing to remind ourselves that we're capable of being.
Yes.
There are no villains in the book.
There are no
Michael
villains.
is not a bad guy.
No.
I like Michael. I like Brent. All these people are likable characters. They have their differences, but in some ways, I think they're all relatable.
Well, and I think, like you said early on in our interview here, that you said something about how on the surface you might look at someone like Brent and think, here's his political views, and here's what he's like, because he's been in the military, he lives in Georgia. I assume he's a white man, in a suburb.
White male, 50s,
Yeah.
drives a pickup truck,
Right.
has a dog in it,
Right.
Probably has a gun in it.
Right.
He's probably on his way to hunt somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's not that person. And the only way you learn that is by talking to people one-on-one.
I think that's really well put, yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. Which we don't do very much in this world today.
It's hard.
Another instance in the book that resonated with me that I remembered was his wife Laura going to work at the polls. Mm-hmm. And it's such an innocent thing. I think her mother had worked at the polls at one point. Her mother may have just died or was ill, and she wanted to work the polls in the 2020 election in Georgia, which is fraught.
It became more and more fraught,
Yeah.
yes, of course. With people coming into the polls, there are certain guidelines you have to follow, but people would test them. And one guy, you're not supposed to have firearms, for instance, but people came in with firearms, and how do you deal with that person? Do you just let them go? Do you try to say something which might cause a flare-up? Again, there's so much delicate dancing that goes on in interactions that used to just be so commonplace and calm all the time.
Yeah.
Laura, oh my gosh, I like Laura. Watching her at the polls was interesting. There's a chapter about Laura that I think a lot of people can relate to. Just at the center of her life is, well, there are a couple things. There's a growing sense of fear, like a lot of people have. Laura also has her own dreams, and she used to have this dream where she was in a car. Brent was driving. She was next to Brent, and their two daughters were in the back seats. Emily, who is out of college now, but during this she was in college. And they have another daughter, Meredith, who was born with Down syndrome. So the four of them were going along. And then Laura sees it shimmering up ahead, and she knows it's water, and she tells Brent to slow down, and Brent keeps going. And then she realizes it's not just a shimmer of water or a puddle, but it's very deep, and they're in it, and they're sinking. And she turns to Brent, but Brent's not there anymore. It's just her in the car with the two girls. They're both in car seats, and she realizes she only has time to unbuckle and save one of them, and who's it going to be? And she would always wake up before she had to make her decision.
It makes me anxious just hearing that dream.
It's an awful dream. Her life, the period I was following her, was a version of that dream in a way, because everything was built around their younger daughter, Meredith. Getting her on a school bus in the morning, then having to do everything during the day that she has to get done in a certain amount of time, which was running a house, teaching online classes, she's a professor, dealing with her mom, who was quite sick and living down the street and dying, and taking care of her medications and her failing memory and everything else, traffic, everything that has to go on. But she had to be home by 3:20 p.m. every day when Meredith's bus would pull up. Mm-hmm. Because if the bus pulled up and she weren't there and Meredith got off, there would be the dream. She would have made her decision. So watching her navigate life with all these pressures on her, and then a deepening sense of melancholy there are many things I felt honored to have written about and witnessed in this book, and the life of Laura Cummings is certainly one of them.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your process of research and writing.
So again, the kind of journalism I do, it's a narrative journalism. It's journalism, first of all, so it's the kind of thing where every sentence in the book can't be built on assumptions. It has to be a defensible piece of reporting, whether it's observed, whether it comes from a document, wherever. So I'm a reporter first. And again, my main method is planting myself and observing. And I don't know what the story is when I start. I just know there's an interesting moment. And eventually I do know the story. I know the story when I know the last line of the book. And once I can envision the last line, it means I've come to an understanding of the story I want to tell. And then I'm done. And then I sit down, and it's a very deliberate process, outline all my material. I probably had 100 notebooks for this thing and stacks of documents. And you just get control of your material, and you take this pile of chronology and you turn it into an outline that has a narrative arc to it, and you know the last line, and then you just kind of write to the last line. Simple.
actually-
It's that simple.
It's that simple. Yeah. Do you record anything, or do you just take physical notes?
I do both. I do. There's always something going on because I think it's important to remind people of what this relationship is, that I'm a reporter, I'm not a social worker. I'm not there to be a friend. I'm there to listen to everything and then make choices about what's going to be in a book that, first of all, they can't read until it comes out. That's journalism ethics, because they can't be their own editor of their own story or censor. And second, that I care about them, but I'm sure you know this. We're not writing to them. We're writing about them to an audience that doesn't care about them unless we tell the story well.
Right.
And so then it becomes a matter of trying to construct a story sentence by sentence to that last line.
How are they doing today?
You know, I think okay. I think all the characters in the book have some reservations about it because of the moment we're in, and I think they have concerns about whether being publicly identified with a political position will come back and haunt them in some way. I hope that doesn't happen. I can't promise it won't. I wouldn't make that promise, but I think better to put it in Brent's words. When I got the book, I sent him a copy, of course, so he could read it. I had gone through the book with him a few months before. There's a thing in journalism when you're not writing about a politician, when you're writing about someone who's quote unquote ordinary, this kind of no surprises rule where you let them know pretty much what's coming so they won't be surprised when they actually see the thing. So while he couldn't read the book, I went through it thoroughly enough that he would have an understanding of what the book would be like. When he read it, he got in touch and he said he had been through it. He said some nice things. He thought the writing was beautiful. That's always nice to hear. That the story was right. He also said it's not the book he would have written, which sounds right to me. And he said, before he read the book, his concern was what people who read it would think of him. After reading it, his concern has shifted to now he's concerned about people who don't read the book and make assumptions what they'll think of him. So if underlying everything was an attempt at writing a book of understanding, then that suggests, at least to him, I succeeded.
Are you working on anything else at the moment?
I'm not. Any ideas?
Well, keep your eyes open this year. There'll probably be some that will come up.
I think there's a good chance.
Yeah. David Finkel, thank you for being with us today to talk about your book, An American Dreamer, Life in a Divided Country. It was really great to talk to you.
Thanks very much.